These are like video courses, kind of like masterclasses if you were learning filmmaking with Scorsese, but instead it's How to Be a Horrible Person with Andrew Tate. And one of his most famous and early courses was called the Tate PhD, which he thought was a very clever play on words, as it stood for the pimping hose degree. And in that course, he essentially taught men how to find and attract essentially vulnerable women who they could then groom into working for them in the online sex industry. Tate himself has always been very open about the fact that where he first made his money was in running online sex webcam companies, for which he's now under investigation for allegations of human trafficking.
Emma Vigeland of The Majority Report with Sam Seder talks to a couple of freelance reporters who were inside Andrew Tate's manosphere for a time and write about it. And it's an interesting conversation, especially in the sense that Andrew Tate is returning to the United States. He stands accused of human trafficking and rape, I believe, in Romania, which is pretty intense that they let him leave the country. Anyway, let's watch this together. I'll have some thoughts as we go, and then I want to know what you think of the comments.
So, of course, you were investigating Andrew Tate for around 4 years, and this started when you guys were with Vice in 2019. For people in our audience that may not be familiar with Andrew Tate and the manosphere, what is it, and why is it important, I think, in this particular moment in history to understand it? Either of you, go ahead. Whoever wants to go first.
Yeah, sure. So the manosphere is kind of a broad term for a group of sort of individual groups amongst themselves that make up sort of men's online rights activists. And it includes groups like incels, the involuntary celibates, who get quite a lot of press attention, pickup artists who were particularly popular in kind of the earlier era of the manosphere, men that would teach other men how to get women, and also these kind of red pill male influencers who try to sort of explain away the woes of the world by essentially blaming it on women and the failure of feminism and modern liberal society. Andrew Tate is a influencer who kind of comes in some sense from 2 or 3 of the worlds within the manosphere. He's a bit of a red pillar. He's a bit of a pickup artist. And he became incredibly famous in 2022, dominating social media platforms, basically showing his ostentatious, lavish lifestyle, making incredibly shocking, misogynistic comments, and selling courses teaching other men how to make money online and be just like him.
And Matt, how did his popularity increase? Like, what was the origins of his popularity? How did he come into the public eye? And I saw some poll of British men under the age of 18 that showed him like a few years ago having above 50% popularity, which is deeply concerning. Maybe that's taken a hit, but like there was a time where he really was doing the influencing thing, actually influencing people.
I think he still is. I think first we should get an idea of the scale of that popularity. So by many metrics, Andrew Tate at his peak was the most famous person in the world. One of the most successful people of all time on social media. At one point was the most Googled man in the world. You pointed out a study in the UK that shows that, at one point a majority of young boys and men had a positive view of him. There's similar polls reflect his support in the US and Australia and all around the world, really. And when you consider the extreme views that he's putting out there, this might come as quite a shock. But the way he achieved...
It does to me. I mean, I understood that, he had a megaphone and a following, but I had no idea it was that popular.
That fame and that popularity he was one of these people who was kind of an early realizer of the fact that the louder and more controversial you are, the more that the algorithms on various social media platforms will push you out. And the speed at which he became, by many metrics, the most famous man in the world is unprecedented in history, really. It was a matter of months that he was able to kind of take over Twitter, TikTok. And I think that, one of the main ways he was able to do that was simply by being controversial and being loud, and the algorithms favored that. But also, he did have a pretty kind of clever scheme where he would essentially create an affiliate marketing program where you would you were encouraged, his followers were encouraged to share content of him, specifically more controversial content. And underneath the videos that they shared, there would be a sign-up link to his online courses where you would learn how to become supposedly wealthy and successful like him and how to become an alpha male. And so if someone signed up through your link underneath your video you posted of Andrew Tate, you would get a percentage of the sign-up fee. So it was kind of like he financially incentivized young men all across the world to make him famous. And he had a kind of social media marketing team, a small team of young guys. It's not some crazy sophisticated operation. If anything, it shows just how easy it is to manipulate these social media algorithms. A few guys in a house somewhere in Romania can basically manipulate the algorithms to make someone the most famous man in the world overnight.
And what did his content look like? What were some of the major themes? How did he break through the noise? There are a lot of folks on the internet, like Nick Fuentes or whatever, that say the most outrageous things possible, but they don't get to the peak of his popularity.
So he made some really shocking misogynistic comments. He spoke about women should in part be responsible for their own rapes because they put themselves in situations to be raped. He said the world would be a better place if women had the number of men they'd had sex with tattooed on their forehead. But he would also do videos that kind of trod the line between, is he joking or is he not? So he did a video like why men shouldn't hang out with their sisters, where he sort of explained why he didn't hang out with his sister, because one, she was a liberal Bernie supporter, but two, men should only hang out with other strong men. If you hang out with women, it makes you weak. So it was kind of a mixture of content, and it was the more shocking content that went most viral. But what Tate did quite cleverly is, and he said this explicitly to us, he said, like, I'm selling the James Bond lifestyle. So along with all the misogyny, he also had himself traveling the world, going on yachts in Croatia, high rises in Dubai. So he was shocking, but he also had this lifestyle element that young men were kind of drawn to in a really shallow way in many ways. The other side of Tate's content, which is now coming more to light, but something which we were kind of investigating from the get-go, was the content of his actual courses. These are like video courses, kind of like masterclasses if you were learning filmmaking with Scorsese, but instead it's how to be a horrible person with Andrew Tate. And one of his most famous and early courses was called the Tate PhD, which he thought was a very clever play on words, as it stood for the pimping hose degree. And in that course, he essentially taught men how to find and attract essentially vulnerable women who they could then groom into working for them in the online sex industry. Tate himself has always been very open about the fact that where he first made his money was in running online sex webcam companies, for which he's now under investigation for allegations of human trafficking.
And that, I guess, was a part of his move to Romania in 2017, where then the authorities are continuing their investigation into him as well. People may have seen some of the photos of him kind of in captivity by the police forces there. But that move to Romania, Matt, could you talk a little bit about the timing of that? It feels like they're also at this very time in history, Me Too was a big phenomenon in the United States and in the UK. His popularity rising as this movement for kind of female activism against rape culture was increasing seems like it's not a coincidence at all.
Yeah, I mean, we now know that he moved to Romania after a police investigation into him for rape and physical abuse, allegations which he denies, of at least 3 women back in the UK. At the time, he ran a webcam sex studio in the UK. And he did say that, he often said that Romania is a country where you can get away with more. And specifically in the context of sexual assault accusations, he may say he was joking about that, but that that is around the time he moved to Romania. Of course, the Romanian authorities then, as Jamie said, did arrest him and formally indict him for human trafficking and a series of other very serious criminal allegations, which he denies, but which he's yet to stand trial for. So, it turns out that if he was moving to Romania because he thought the authorities would be more lenient to him there, it turns out they were actually, that was not the case, very far from it. But is Andrew Tate a reaction to the kind of Me Too movement? It's something that gets brought up a lot. I think, you can certainly see that, like, there is he's encouraging young men and men to potentially act in a misogynistic way, which runs counter to the Me Too movement. But I think what you're really seeing is a lot of men who feel that for whatever reason they haven't lived up to their idea of masculinity, whether that is having lots of sex with beautiful women, whether that's having fast cars, whether that's being rich, whether that's being good at fighting, whatever their image of masculinity that they felt they were promised, they aren't living up to it. And there's an element of self-hate and lack of self-worth there, fragility. And a lot of that, especially with young men, is to do with sex. It's to do with, I am not getting the sex I feel I deserve. That's what the whole incel, involuntary celibate movement is about. There's always been men, though, right, who feel that they're not getting, laid as much as they want to be. And there's always been charlatans and pickup artists who've
right.
come in to try to help them. What's different is that group of men has now kind of metastasized into a kind of political movement that thinks that they're not getting the sex they're owed, not just because they have, crappy game with women or whatever, but because things like the Me Too movement, things like feminism, things like women having access to too many male partners, too much free choice, they feel that they are owed sex and that women and feminism is denying it them. And so they need to sort of loudly reclaim this version of masculinity. I mean, ultimately, though, that is a fragile masculinity. That's a kind of a destroyed male ego trying to claw back at something.
Yeah, and the opposition needs to do a better job of defining positive masculinity, frankly. But Jamie, you both have been talking about how he integrated this with influencer culture, which is, presents things aspirationally and can maybe look like this is what it looks like to be an actualized man. All you've got to do is sign up for my courses and everything will be solved for you. Like,
I could see how that is a relatively easy hook to bait, but I am fascinated by what he was just talking about, which is this sort of sense of entitlement to, right, like, I deserve a certain amount of sex, or I deserve a certain amount of status, and where that comes from. Like, what has led to the rise of that? Does that coincide with social media? Is that algorithms? Is that right? That's the real engine of it writ large.
When you talk about it being a political force, it's hard to ignore that in this country, Donald Trump defeated Kamala Harris. He talked about beating her up, or what it was, Mike Tyson beating her up. The initial reaction to her entering the race was she didn't deserve it. She slept her way to the top. Trump wins. Abortion's on the ballot as well. And then he nominates bunch of people that have been credibly accused of major sexual assault, like Pete Hegseth, to one of the top positions. Steve Bannon harnessed Gamergate to initially build Trump's support of, like, these online misogynistic communities. It feels like this is really the culmination of that political force, in addition to other things about Trump. But really, this is a big piece of it, having success in this country.
Yeah, and Tate has played a big part in that promotion of Trump in the US. And the relationship between Tate and the Trump seemingly goes back further than most people would be aware of. Andrew Tate had a meeting with Donald Trump Jr. back in 2019. They took a photo together, which Tate used to sell one of his other courses on networking. Tate had Mike Cernovich, the sort of famous alt-right commentator who, assisted Donald Trump in some ways in his first election. Cernovich attended one of Tate's War Room summits as a professor in Romania, the very first one. And we found a lot of links between Tate and sort of the MAGA right. And a lot of them seem to come through this guy called Miles Sonkin, an American citizen who we essentially investigated and uncovered the true identity of in our book. He goes by the name of Iggy Semmelweis and sort of LARPs as a wizard. But he had lots of connections with kind of MAGA land and put those people in touch with Tate. And I think it was kind of a symbiotic relationship in that Tate had lots of young male fans, and that was useful to Trump, particularly as we saw in the most recent election. But also in the era of Trump, politics has become the best way to get traction on social media, talking about political issues. And Tate really, really latched onto that as well. Obviously diving down the more conspiratorial end, but there has been this sort of symbiotic relationship between Trump and the Tates.
And Matt, who are some of the other players in like the almost extended universe for Andrew Tate that people may be familiar with? I mean, Fresh and Fit is the first kind of duo that comes to mind.
Yeah, Fresh and Fit. They're sort of in the kind of misogyny shock jock world, quite big. Sneeko, people like Aiden Ross, but you know,
Trump appeared on his stream.
Trump appeared on his stream. Yeah, it's really crazy to think that Trump appeared on the stream of one of Andrew Tate's biggest sycophants. It's crazy, but
recommended to him by his son Barron.
Also, one of the Trump children has met with Tate, right, Jamie?
Yeah, Trump Jr. and also a current Trump staffer. Before becoming a Trump staffer, spent 2 days staying at Tate's house in Romania. There are lots of connections between them. Trump had a photo op in the run-up to the recent election with Justin Waller, who's another friend of Tate's, has lived in Romania with Tate and is a member of his war room that we investigated.
We investigated for being a global cult that trains men how to groom women into sex work.
I want to get to that next. For sure.
This is really serious stuff that the American right and Republican Party are associating themselves with people that they may not even realize are accused of incredibly serious crimes. Elon Musk, now we also have like kind of boosting Andrew Tate. I mean, Elon Musk reinstated Andrew Tate on X, but he also has like retweeted and supported him on Twitter recently.
I mean, of course they're going to claim that they didn't have any idea, but come on.
And yeah, this comes at a time where, you know, we've talked about the extreme side, but then you also have lots of stuff in between. You have Joe Rogan, you have Dana White, the founder of UFC, and their influence on a kind of another kind of fragile masculinity, which we saw that in Mark Zuckerberg, who put Dana White on his board at the same time as he went on Joe Rogan to kind of proclaim that we needed to be more masculine, and in his tech company Meta needed to be more masculine and become too effeminate. So this idea of like reclaiming masculinity and the fear of like the feminization of men is present on the extreme side, but also, you know, it's at the top levels of Meta and the Republican Party.
It is present in basically every fascist movement. I mean, even if you look at the rise of in Nazi Germany, Hitler appealed to like this. What was it? Around a third of men were out of work around that time, and tried to appeal to that sense of a lost masculine ideal with nationalism, but also like, you know, giving people jobs and putting incentives to keep women in the home, producing Aryan babies. I mean, Viktor Orban is renewing the style of politics. This is not new. It's
a fascinating conversation. I think Andrew Tate, I think, is a particularly loathsome individual, but it makes sense that, the Trump sphere would want to, it's the success of it as much as all the other stuff. They'll deny that they, are anti-woman, but all their policies seem to line up with it. Let me know what you think in the comments.